Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'll be your moderator for today's session. My name is Walter Viegas, and I am the Senior Director of Post Program for KeyCode Media. And with me today, I have here on my right, Evan Sandstrand, who's the President of Aurora Borealis, and also Jason Matusik, the Head of Market Programs and Revenue for OpenDrives. So, to get started, let's actually first understand how we got here. So the pandemic obviously catapulted many of our media and entertainment space and workflows into the cloud. And that's from its scalability and also its access to storage and compute. So that was a quick catapult in what I think historically would have been very hard to fathom before the pandemic. So where we are now is a challenge with that simplicity and elasticity of the cloud. It allowed now for many silos and a lot of data being spread across many different verticals. So that data sprawl now has impacted our ability to really truly manage the cloud and own all of our assets. So we see that content is now scattered, whether you're geographically spread in different regions, different territories, different silos, different platforms, different services. And along with that, we have a lot of different costs that are now skyrocketing. And everyone is starting to really wonder, is this the right decision? Should I have put so much in the cloud? What we thought was going to live there forever now needs to be moved. Egress fees and charges and everything else related to that distribution now of the data as we need it on different platforms and different tools as they're coming out. So really, is this a battle that we're seeing or more of an evolution? So with that, I'd like to kick it off, with Evan. What are your thoughts on this? And is there really a winner?
I'm not sure if there needs to be a winner, but the way I look at cloud is it's kind of a treacherous lover. It can do a lot of good things for you, but it can also break your budgets, take your house, steal your car, and leave you listening to country music. In seriousness, though, cloud can very easily become overly complicated, overly costly, etc. What I tend to think is that there's an old saying in marketing: no one ever got fired for buying IBM. And in certain business critical scenarios, I think on-prem will win over cloud any day. When the stakes are high, when compliance and regulations are paramount, the safe, quote unquote, choice will be on-premise. But like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be a winner between this or that. What we really need is a new model that can incorporate both. A hybrid model is what I want to start seeing more of.
Treacherous lover. I love that. So Jason, what are your thoughts, and where should the data in our ecosystem be?
Yeah, so I don't have anything as good as treacherous lover, but what I think is it really depends. And I think that in today's day and age, there's a lot of conversation where people feel like cloud and on-prem need to be in some kind of an opposition to each other. I'm going to go cloud and, the hell with on-prem, or vice versa. And I think really, in this day and age, what people should be asking themselves is, does the cloud hold advantages that would benefit my organization the best, or should on-prem be what I choose in order to take advantage of its characteristics? It's more of an and relationship than I believe that it's going to be a versus relationship.
So Evan, what are your thoughts on that?
So I agree a lot with what Jason's saying. Absolutely. The cloud needs to move into the buildings. Some of the characteristics of cloud-based technology needs to be put into the on-prem systems. Simple things, really, based on open and documented APIs, elasticity, containerization, and the ability to work both with on-prem systems and cloud-based systems. And very importantly, more collaboration, even between competing manufacturers, is really necessary if this new hybrid model is going to become pervasive.
So I think what I'm hearing from you guys is that there really isn't a winner, but more of an amalgamation of the two becoming one.
Well, the winner's the business. This pendulum swing back and forth between cloud and hybrid, cloud and on-premise and cloud and on-premise. Think of it like the stock market and investors. Business leaders don't need this kind of confusion and this pendulum swings back and forth. We need a stability. We need a clear path forward so that businesses can be the winners in this.
So to that, how does a business decide where the data is best fit when you're moving across both on-prem and cloud and data services and things of that?
Well, as I stated at the beginning, in some cases when regulation laws are applied to highly regulated business, then that's going to be the deciding factor. But I know, Jason, you have an additional viewpoint on that. What will be the deciding factor?
So for me, I think what is really going to drive it are going to be the users, right? Ultimately, today users have a lot of choices in front of them. Some of them really like the fact that they could put data in the cloud and it becomes, somebody's infrastructure to manage that isn't theirs. However, there's also, a lot of reaction to the way that public cloud, prices, as well as some of the security risks, lack of visibility into, cloud topology. And that can really, I think, scare a lot of people. So that's where I think there's this push and pull, right? And users are going to want certain aspects of the cloud, the dynamic scalability of the cloud for one, that I think when people move their creative workflows into the cloud and started getting the benefit of being able to scale different workflow steps up and down in their content life cycles, they really like that. But if they wanted to bring that kind of functionality on-prem, is that available, right? So I think in some cases they're going to look at the cloud and they're going to say, this is the most appropriate thing for me. That's going to, I believe, motivate other kinds of manufacturers to do on-prem, to build solutions that can offer the same thing. And the two different, let's call them factions for lack of a better word, they're going to push each other and they're going to, I think, create over time this convergence between what's going to be available on-prem and off-prem, all of that being driven by customer need and what they believe is going to make them the most competitive in the market.
Yeah, and listen, today there are some great examples of really good solutions that are cloud installed, but enable a hybrid model. Some of the leading MAM systems, for instance, can work with on-prem storage and cloud-based storage. Some can even be installed on-prem. There are workflow orchestration systems that can tie these worlds together. So we're heading in the right direction with all of this, but it needs to become the standard model for going forward.
So this merging of the cloud and on-prem, right? So it really should be a standard. I think from a media and entertainment perspective, we were probably the last vertical to really adopt cloud services, right? And we were of the mindset that you can only edit in a gray four-wall 10 by 10 room. And so really, I think, not to steal something from Microsoft, but we're talking about something like a OneDrive in the sense of the word.
OneDrive is not an editing source.
Yeah, don't use that for this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And by the way, it's trademarked. I can't take that. But a single drive, that regardless of where the data is, it's essentially where it needs to be based on that life cycle of that data set at the moment, right? And so, Ivan, I think you brought up a good point about whether the security posture of the data, right? So if that data is unreleased or it's secret, top secret for official use only, whatever that data set is, it's actually going to it's going to evolve in itself, right? So it will be a time where it has to be on-prem. And there'll be a time that it's no longer needed on-prem. The security measures are loosened and it's moving somewhere else. So with that in mind, I think, we're starting to see, right, within the industry, a lot of tools that are definitely blending, into your point about some of the leading MAMs that are creating that invisibility of whether the data is in the cloud or actually on-prem, right? It's just available to you. You can do your job. And when it's time to conform, it knows where the high res is. So thinking about, like, for example, on Atlas's platform from OpenDrive, you have a feature, Jason, right, where you can cache, right? So you can set up an OpenDrive system to cache the cloud. So essentially having the data available at high speed for the editors to work off of, but that infinite scalability, right, from the having the actual data set in the cloud. And recently you launched a new product, Astraeus. So how is Astraeus, what is that and how is that bridging these two worlds?
Sure. So, being I'm a software manufacturer and data service manufacturer, primarily with an on-prem focus, we had a lot of conversations, with our user base in media and entertainment. And, really over the past 5 years, especially since, let's call them the troubles of 2020, people really think differently about data. Data, as far as where am I going to put it? What kind of a bit bucket do I need? Is it fast enough? A lot of those questions have already been answered. That's really not of huge concern to a lot of workflow architects. They have that solved. I think today the kinds of business problems and data problems that people are really thinking about is how do I get more from my data, right? It's about insight and making data fluid and making it accessible to all the users and all the different applications and data services that need it. That's the important thing. And when we sit down with our users, that's what they're focused on, right? How can you get me better access? How can you deliver me a solution that is going to allow all of my users to work from one version of the truth at the same time, all together without any kinds of barriers between them and the data? So we started to address that with our Atlas platform, which had some containerization embedded in, that allowed people to take a storage system and ask it to do more, to run different applications and services to help move data off to other places, whether that's some kind of a centralized editorial studio, or however their workflow is built, as well as, offering things like orchestration platforms and data visibility tools. And as we have progressed, through our Atlas journey, we realize that really isn't enough, right? What people are looking for is, I don't want any silos. I don't want any barriers between data sets. I don't want any barriers between users and the data, wherever that data may live. And that's what Astraeus is doing. It's building a platform that creates a single environment where you have cloud-like orchestration capabilities over your critical applications, and it gives you the ability to unify all of your data sources into that same environment, so that there are no walls between data and users. Everything is collapsed into a single location, making everything very accessible and easy to use and scalable.
Could I jump in with a lament, so to speak? Couple of things that I strongly believe. And one is users should not have to care where the file is. They should not have to worry about it. And whether the file is sitting on a slow but cheap tier 3 storage or high performant flash storage in tier 1, they should not have to worry about that. Secondly, the CTO should not have to fear for his job for lack of security. And the CFO should not have to fear for her job because they're breaking the budgets with where the files or the data is being stored. I'm working with a customer right now that has a situation that I think is very typical. We have to date discovered X number of storages, NAS's, shared network storage, etc., spread out throughout the organization. It's a massive challenge for them to know where their data is. They duplicate like you wouldn't believe. We need to bring this in under one umbrella, a single global namespace or a single global storage fabric that, again, users can just tap into, and the file just happens to be where they need it to be when they need it to be there.
We got to make those treacherous lovers friendly so that they can mend their, yes, absolutely. Sorry.
That's my little rant for the day.
No, that's good to know. I mean, obviously, I think something that would resonate with everyone here today is you find, I come across, right? So you'll have your on-prem storage, which will be defined in different tiers, right? So you'll have your production storage, your online storage, your nearline storage, your coloring storage. If you're doing coloring, you'll have a tape library or a robot. So you'll have that data set. You'll have data in the cloud if you're doing any sort of S3 tiering off of cloud or off of tape into cloud. And then that's not even tying in some of these other tools to really, tie into people at home with Lucid Link or Suite Studio. So there's literally data sets everywhere. And that's just of the data that is being managed. That's not even looking at the other data that exists out in the ether with, like, for example, Frame.io that has an entire additional data set. And, those are real problems, and you can think of that problem as one office. So if you now have a location in the East Coast, one in the West Coast, and one in London, you can essentially pretty much guarantee that you have that problem times 3. Because you're using AWS East versus AWS West, you're using AWS UK, and they have their own on-prem, their own storage and things of that nature. So I think orchestration is going to be obviously key, right? And so, Evan, how do you then define as a business where the data is, and how do you manage the data going from all these different tiers? Because it becomes invisible, right, to one, essentially what we're saying, but it's actually moving in the background unbeknownst to the team.
Well, the way we've done it up to so far is we hire a bunch of media managers who move the files around from this tier to that tier and restore it off a tape. And you send in a request, can I please get a copy of this? Yeah, you can have it tomorrow. Well, I really needed it today, kind of. That's not the way we're going to be doing it in the future. We need this tool, something like the Astraeus thing that these guys are building, that can automate all of this based on sets of business rules, predictable behavior. There's a role for AI to play in this, and for file transfer solutions to be built in so the files can move just transparently up and down the tiers. And I would love to be able to see the day come when the storage system knows what I'm going to be working on before I even know it. Something happens out there in the world, and it's related to, let's say, Hulk Hogan. And an AI system goes and brings back anything related to Hulk Hogan from my archive and puts it up on the editing storage so that editors who now need to put out a story about him can access it immediately.
Yeah, and I think
I have that, please.
No. And I think that, this is where cloud has really been, I think, accepted and embraced by a lot of folks. And this is really what's pushing on-prem manufacturers like myself to start to innovate, right? Because the one barrier that we have to that universal orchestration capability is the fact that you have one version, right? You have quote unquote cloud native applications and data services living in the cloud that can scale up and scale down at a moment's notice on demand. And then on-prem, trying to architect that same kind of experience is very, very difficult, right? Because on-prem architecture was never built with that in mind. So what we need to have that same experience on both sides of the football. And, this is why our version of this is, well, let's build that cloud native experience in an on-prem solution. There are other manufacturers that are out there in the market that are approaching this from a different perspective, but all of this is being brought about by the fact that you want to have one standard experience, right? Whether you're on-prem, whether you're in the cloud, and the more closely those two experiences resemble each other, the more convergence you're going to see, and the closer we're going to get to that ability to say, I don't care where that file is. It could be on-prem, it can live over there in my Isilon, it can live up in the cloud. I just have access to it, and I know that if I log into this one space, I'm going to be able to find it, right? You have to be able to unite your cloud, your on-prem, and take advantage of the capabilities of both. I'll go even further.
I used to think of storage systems as pretty dumb. And all they did was give me a file name and a little bit of others, size, date, etc. But there was no information about what is actually inside of this file. In order for the vision of Astreas become reality and really benefit the users, I think it's necessary that storage systems start understanding what's inside the file, all the way down to the pixel level. Today, we analyze data, AI engines analyze data in frames. But there will come a day where we'll be looking at the individual pixels inside of a file and making decisions about the content based on that. This is a massive challenge for the storage manufacturers.
And I think it's even more than that, right? Because, I mean, with the AWS outage that we had earlier this week, things like resiliency really come into play. People need to have, an approach to making sure that their businesses can continue to run. Similarly, data governance is a big one, right? People need to know where their data lives. Some data, you can't have it in the cloud. Some data needs to be in a tier of storage that is, per terabyte cheaper. These are really important characteristics of the data and not necessarily intrinsic to the data itself. So the storage is being asked more and more to take on those responsibilities and give people the tools to be able to manage that through different, whether it's orchestration or data intelligence solutions, even AI engines. We're starting to give them central nervous systems now and allowing them to make these decisions on their own.
I'm glad you brought up the AWS. I'm glad you brought up the AWS example, because in the earlier, where I mentioned Atlas has the caching of the cloud, that outage would have been transparent to the team on-prem. Obviously, if you're working from home and accessing the data that way, you would have experienced the outage, unless you were VPNing back in. But in that particular case, that's, I think, what you're referring to in terms of resilience of where a system can actually deal with the faults and still make them transparent to the end users.
Yeah, exactly. And, everybody's going to want to have a different approach to that. Again, it's going to be based on the characteristics of their organization. And, that's why I was saying this is where the unification of these different technologies, right, this convergence that we're talking about, building true hybrid solutions, is going to be driven by the users who need that level of capability, whether it's through having a separate copy of critical data on-prem so that they can withstand widespread outages, or, the ability to take resources and move them from one application to another. Those are the kinds of demands that, companies like OpenDrives and, even Aurora Borealis and KeyCode are responding to right now and trying to build those solutions for folks to be able to, very confidently install a solution that's going to give them all that flexibility.
So we're actually talking about a marriage of two worlds, right? Is essentially what we're talking about here.
It's a very romantic conversation.
Yes.
I like it.
These actually will not, and I want to say that the hybrid's probably not even going to be a good word, because it's almost like when you expand on storage, you don't consider that expansion a hybrid. And that's why I think that's going to be really a marriage where the two are going to operate as one. And all of the services, and if you walk even the halls, you're starting to see a lot of that theme, from some of the vendors, right? Where they're offering seamless tools that seem like it's cloud, but it's really from on-prem. And so you mentioned earlier too, the ability for the cloud systems to come on-prem. And so, and I think you touched on Astreas doing that. So similar to like S3 was born in the cloud, but now we see S3 being used on-prem.
Right.
And now for Kubernetes and things of that nature, for either cloud native applications or non-cloud native applications, the platform is bridging that gap too, is it not?
Right. Yes. And I think it's because application creators, S3 is a great standard, and it's a standard that a lot of technologies now are offering, whether you're looking at, the cloud, whether you're looking at on-prem storage presenting data, using S3, whether we're talking about, some kind of on-prem object storage, S3 is everywhere. So it makes sense for them to use the latest and greatest technologies to build applications, and that's why we're starting to see it really proliferate.
The protocols are there, the technology is there.
It just all needs to be wired together. That's the problem.
Just need the minister to marry.
And one of the advantages too to cloud type technology is that it's designed to fail. Unlike production storage is not designed to fail. And when you have a hard drive failure, you run over and try to change the drive. But when you're looking at S3 type buckets, they have multiple drive failures. They're designed to not have the most expensive hard drives, right? So that cost efficiencies then actually come down into the on-prem, which is actually a benefit then from an on-prem perspective. But looking at that, what are your thoughts on like how, like what are the next steps and how is it that a business, what should a business be looking at in terms of today and the technology that they're looking at today in this evolution?
Go first.
Sure. So I think that if, currently you are looking to re-architect your workflow, working with technology experts, because there is really very little regulation right now, especially when it comes to cloud, right? There are a lot of different companies that are making little bits and pieces of the workflow, and it really takes a lot of knowledge and staying on the industry to know how those pieces fit together, right? Going multi-cloud, for example, is not always very simple, right? Because you're taking, let's say AWS and GCP, which even though they have very similar DNA, they're not the same, right? So you have to be able to bridge those gaps. So I think the most important thing to do is to really work with someone who understands those technologies and make demands, right? The industry is pushing forward. Technology is moving very rapidly. And I don't think that people really need to compromise on the workflow. If there is something that you think is an advantage, bring that up. And that's going to force companies like OpenDrives and Aurora and KeyCode to go and find those and start to build those more advanced solutions. And that's what keeps everything driving forward. And that's what's starting to build the standardization that we just have not been able to arrive at this point.
I would say, I don't know how many, especially media customers I work with, and when they start thinking about a legacy data migration, and I ask them, well, what's your content worth? Is this stuff that you have sitting over there, is it worth anything? You want to preserve it? You want to migrate it? And the answer is, we don't know. We barely know what's in there. So you got to start with understanding that your data has intrinsic value. And you need to understand what that value is. And based on that knowledge, you will then be able to make good, better, best decisions about how and where to you're going to be storing your stuff in this hybrid universe where some of it is going to be sitting perhaps still on tape. Other stuff is going to be sitting on high performance flash storage. And a whole bunch of it will probably sit in the cloud somewhere. Yeah. You need to understand what you have before you can make those decisions.
Yeah, I was reading an article in the Harvard Business Review, and they were talking about the fact that the people who are moving up in organizations today are the people who can ask the most intelligent questions of their data. It's not the people who are designing the bit boxes, it's the people who can make the bit boxes sing, right? So I think that when you're designing your workflow, that's what you need to keep in mind. How, it's not about just storing something away on the cheapest per terabyte option. It's about how am I positioning myself to be able to use my data in a way that's going to move my organization forward. It's going to make me more competitive. It's going to give me the insights that are going to, help us to drive revenue or be more efficient or whatever your KPI happen to be.
Yeah, I think that you bring up actually a really good point in to add to that because we really haven't touched on AI, right? So, but even in your example about data migration, right? So I think it's important to know you can migrate off tape into cloud and even all the way into Deep Glacier, but you'll never know what you just migrated unless you ran it through some AI. But
I hired a bunch of media managers sitting
to watch a lot of video. I don't know. That's
the companies who have done that.
That's a lot of Hulk Hogan.
That's a lot of key logging too. But an important factor though, right, is if you even don't want to do the AI today, you should think about your data migration and where it's going. And do you need to recall that when you do want to run AI? Or do you better sit it somewhere where you can run AI off of when you're ready to actually do that and invest in that intrinsic knowledge that's embedded into all of the video?
Yeah, it's establishing the ability to grow into that capability set because that technology is just ramping like gangbusters, right? And who knows, I mean, even by the end of the year where we're going to be with AI capabilities. So being ready for that is vitally important.
Right. And not knowing how we're going to use this data set in the Hulk Hogan example, right? And that's, we see that a lot in sports. You'll see a bunch of tape, but it's not important until maybe that key player passed away. And now they're like, hey, where's all that 1966 footage? That's right. So that's where that all of a sudden now you're scrambling to figure out, like, does anybody actually know where that footage is?
Yeah.
But I think we're a little bit out of time now, and I definitely appreciate everyone for joining us. And if you want to, continue this conversation, obviously Jason, Ivan, and myself were more than happy to continue this conversation, but off the podium. Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, does anybody have any questions? We have one question.
Good morning. What would you say are the main benefits for having a hybrid?
So what are the main benefits for having a hybrid?
The most obvious one, because I hear a lot of people complain about this, is cost control. You're not necessarily going to be reducing complexity, but that is one of the things that a solution like Astreus will help you manage. But getting skyrocketing storage costs under control and through a predictable model, I think is one of the most important benefits.
Yeah, my perspective on this is that another big one is going to be performance. Getting high levels of performance in the cloud can still be very expensive, right? GPU resources in the cloud, not always cheap. And then depending on your agreement with your cloud provider, you may run into contention for those resources, if you're sharing resources amongst your neighbors in a multi-tenant situation. So, hybrid can really work well for someone who does have an element to the workflow that requires low latency or high throughput capability. And then for those that aren't as intense or don't have that requirement, moving that into the cloud and leveraging, let's call it the more general topology there makes a lot of sense. And you can see a lot of cost control that way too.
Right. And then to add to that, those are great responses too, is the flexibility that you gain in terms of reach is now using both. You can actually provide data to your editing team or your production team that is not of the same quality as what you're going to conform, but yet they still have the same content and be able to provide collaborative workflows. So that's where, unless you're having set up with a lot of heavy gear in your infrastructure and VPN and everything to support, and as we call them, headless units, right? So just machines with no monitors or keyboards. Unless you have all of that infrastructure in place already, the cloud is a quick way to get that, to get that delivery to the team. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.